Hello, my name is Evelyn, and for years I stayed silent in my own home. Until one day, my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You've disgusted me since the day I met you." People stared. My son said nothing. I just smiled, because what she didn't know was I had been recording everything. And at my son's birthday party, I played a video that changed everything. "You've disgusted me since the day I met you." The words didn't echo. They landed like velvet daggers in the hush that followed, silencing the clink of glasses and halting even the gentle hum of the old fridge in the corner. Evelyn Harper stood quietly at the edge of the room, her hands folded over her waist, one thumb rhythmically circling the rim of the wineglass she had poured just moments ago. The birthday banner draped across the fireplace read, "Happy 33rd Jason," in shimmering gold letters. Balloons bobbed lazily under the low ceiling fan, swaying in rhythm with the artificial joy that had saturated the room since the first guest arrived. A tiered cake sat untouched on the sideboard, waiting for applause that felt more choreographed than genuine. Brittany was glowing, at least outwardly. Her hair perfectly curled her dress, a curated shade of pastel that flattered every photo. She held her champagne flute high and offered a smile to the guests. To family, she said sweetly, her eyes sweeping the room before locking on to Evelyn. To growth, to leaving behind what's bitter and disgusting. The pause that followed was brutal in its stillness. Jason laughed nervously, but it faded into the silence like steam over cold granite. A few guests glanced toward Evelyn, others pretended to sip their drinks. Brittany's smile never wavered. It was perfectly white, perfectly practiced. Evelyn blinked once, slowly, then offered a soft smile, the kind that neither challenged nor surrendered. She did not lift her glass. Instead, she stepped toward the television cabinet, where an old oak drawer creaked under years of remote controls and tangled wires. She reached for the black plastic remote with hands that barely trembled. She didn't press play. Not yet. The weight of the room tilted slightly as she stood there, the remote in one hand, her gaze drifting toward Brittany's collarbone. A string of soft, pale pearls rested there, familiar, in a way that scratched at Evelyn's memory like an old itch beneath healed skin. Her mother's pearls, gone from the jewelry box after Jason's wedding, now resting on Brittany's throat like they'd always belonged to her. Funny, how small things scream the loudest. She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch Noah, her grandson curled on the couch with his plate of pizza, his eyes darting between the adults like a child decoding a language made of silence and glances. When he caught her gaze, he smiled, not forced, not political, just warm and real. She nodded gently. Her fingers still holding the remote, Evelyn let her mind drift. She remembered the first time Brittany had walked into this house. That day had been sunny, falsely bright, like today. She'd worn an ivory blouse and carried a tote that said, "Good vibes only." Evelyn had offered her a cup of mint tea. Brittany had sniffed it and politely declined. That had been the first no, quiet, harmless. Since then, Brittany had said no in 1,000 ways. No to old traditions, no to heirlooms, no to Sunday dinners, no to Evelyn's stories, all wrapped in velvet courtesy. But the words had stacked one atop another like bricks. And now the wall stood tall and finished the final brick laid by a toast dressed in cruelty. She thinks this is the first blow Evelyn thought the edges of her lips curving minutely. How quaint. It's only the final rehearsal. Her grip on the remote firmed not from anger, but certainty. She turned slightly toward the center of the room, her voice calm, clear. "Let's watch a little home video, shall we?" They said it was temporary, 2 years later, I was the one who had to knock before entering. The hallway still smelled of lemon polish and lavender, the scent Evelyn had always used to clean the oak floors every Friday. Yet as she stepped across the threshold in her memory, it no longer felt like hers. The air was warmer, somehow louder, not from voices, but from the way the space had been reshaped. Brighter paint, colder furniture, sharp light. It all shimmered with Brittany's touch. She remembered the first change, a new rug. Then came the replacement of her lace curtains, the rearrangement of the living room, the casual dismissals of heirlooms. One morning, Brittany stood in front of the tall, glass-fronted tea cabinet that Evelyn had polished weekly for over 20 years. "We can donate these," she said, tapping the porcelain cups with a manicured fingernail. "Nobody drinks this kind of tea anymore." Evelyn had smiled politely, then biting her tongue until she could taste the metal of silence. Jason had stood behind Brittany, one hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it's time we create our own style, Mum," he said, not unkindly, but not firmly enough to stop it either. From that moment, everything began to vanish. First the teacups, then the family portraits. The Sunday roasts were replaced with takeout boxes. Her seat at the head of the table disappeared one dinner without comment. Then came the locked pantry, the unused recipe cards, and finally the closed door. They'd said the arrangement was temporary. Brittany was adjusting to pregnancy. Evelyn could help stay a while. 6 months, they said. Noah had been only 2, then still clinging to her leg, giggling as she spun him around the kitchen in socked feet. "Stay with me forever, Grandma," he'd whispered once, his warm cheek against hers. But time reshaped even love. By year's end, Brittany's smiles thinned, her patience shortened. Evelyn found herself staying in her room, more walking, more softly, waiting until everyone else had eaten. Conversations faded like photographs left in the sun. The day Brittany laughed as Evelyn walked in, it wasn't cruel, not directly. It was just careless, shared with a friend over something insignificant. A chipped dish, perhaps. But the laughter lodged in Evelyn's chest like a splinter she couldn't reach. Jason had grown quieter too. Always tired, always distracted. When Evelyn asked if they were okay, he replied, "Of course, Mom. We just need more space." And eventually, space was what they gave her. The suggestion came wrapped in gratitude. "You've been amazing," Brittany had said, "but maybe it's time for you to rest in your own place. We'll help you set it up beautifully." Jason didn't say much. He'd looked down at his shoes. Noah asked Grandma, "Why are you taking your teacups?" She couldn't answer him, only held his hand for a little longer that morning. She packed alone, folded her nightgown, wrapped the blue porcelain teacups in newspaper, and tucked a faded photo of her and her late husband into a zippered pocket. No one helped. No one stopped her. As she stepped out the door with her single suitcase, the walls remained silent. No goodbye. No one watching from the window. Only the faint sound of Noah's cartoons playing in the background. She paused at the door one last time. Her fingers traced the brass handle her husband had installed years ago. The plaque above still read, "The Harpers." And in her mind, she heard his voice calm and certain. "The house is yours until someone makes you feel like a guest." She turned the key, slowly, locked the door, and walked away. I thought that was the end. I didn't know it was only intermission. "Grandma, why don't you live here anymore?" Noah asked the question while pulling a red crayon across a coloring book, his head tilted, eyes wide and honest. He didn't look up when he said it. His focus was on the rocket ship he was carefully outlining. The innocence made the words sharper. Evelyn blinked. The late afternoon sun filtered through the bay window of what used to be her living room, casting long shadows that touched the carpet like ghostly hands. She sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair, clutching a linen napkin on her lap, though she hadn't touched the cookie on the plate beside her. "I just live somewhere quieter now, sweetheart," she answered softly. From the kitchen floated the sound of clinking dishes. Brittany's voice trailed behind it like perfume. Cheerful, practiced, just a little too loud. She makes lunch look like a banquet, Evelyn thought, as she observed the flickering candles on the table. Midday candles, as if the house had suddenly become a setting for theatre. Noah lifted his crayon again and added casually, "Uncle Robert comes for lunch when Daddy's not here." The words dropped like a pin in an empty cathedral. Evelyn's gaze moved slowly toward the window, where a silver car she didn't recognize was parked just out of direct view. Not in the driveway, never that obvious, but tucked behind the hedge at the edge of the fence line. She smiled faintly and ran her fingers along the upholstery of the armchair, reupholstered in pale grey. Brittany's choice. Evelyn's floral prints had been deemed too busy. In the kitchen, Brittany appeared with a tray of small sandwiches. She wore a crisp white blouse, tucked neatly into tailored pants lips, painted in a muted rose. It was supposedly a cleaning day. Robert stopped by. Evelyn asked voice light as air. Brittany set the tray down, never missing a beat. "He's helping Jason sort through some financial stuff." Evelyn nodded, watching as Brittany smoothed an invisible wrinkle in the cloth napkin. "That's kind of him," she replied, and took a sip of untouched tea. Jason remained silent throughout the visit, appearing briefly to hug Noah, then disappearing into his office without greeting his mother. Evelyn didn't press. She never did. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Evelyn sat in her small but tidy living room, the quiet finally settling around her like an old shawl. She pulled a box of photographs from the cabinet beneath the television. One by one, she flipped through the images, birthdays, school plays, Sunday dinners, all chronicling a life that no longer felt attached to her name. Her fingers paused on a wedding photo. Jason and Brittany smiling beneath an arch of lilies. Jason's eyes full of hope. Brittany's smile, perfect even then, tightened the longer Evelyn stared. With careful deliberation, she tore the photograph in two, separating her son from his bride. She stared at the halves for a long time before slipping the one with Brittany's face into the fireplace grate. Then she reached for a different photo, her husband Bill in uniform eyes, bright beneath his officer's cap. "You always saw through lies, Bill. Now it's my turn." She closed the box, her back a little straighter, breath a little steadier. And then, almost in a whisper to herself, she said, "I needed help." But not from family, from a former student who once needed saving too. I never imagined I'd dial the number of a student I once failed. Rain tapped gently against the window panes of Evelyn's reading nook. The morning was grey, the sky low with drizzle, and the air inside smelled faintly of chamomile and paper. She sat with an old, leather-bound gradebook opened across her knees. Its spine creaked when she turned the page, stopping at a name that hadn't passed her lips in decades. Marcus Webb. Beside the name, a notation in red ink, incomplete. Not for lack of effort, she remembered. He was sharp, thoughtful, but quiet, always looking over his shoulder. Then one day he vanished, suspended over a theft accusation that was never proven and never truly investigated. Evelyn exhaled slowly and reached for the drawer where she kept her old rotary contacts, flipping through handwritten names. Her hand hovered over his number. Was it still current? Was he still who she thought he was? She glanced at the framed photo of Bill on the shelf. His eyes seemed to study her, as they had when she once debated whether to report a cheating student. or when she'd hesitated to confront a principal. "You always said there's a right time for every truth," she whispered. The phone felt heavier than usual as she lifted it. Her fingers paused on the last digit. Then she dialed. The voice that answered was cautious. "Webb Investigations." "Marcus," she said gently. "This is Evelyn Harper, your literature teacher, from Langston High." A long silence. Then Ms. Harper, "Are you—" "All right, I've been better," she replied. "And I'm in need of someone who understands discretion and the power of observation." They agreed to meet that afternoon at Romanos, an old cafe with cracked marble tables and quiet corners. Evelyn arrived early, choosing a booth near the back. When Marcus entered, he was broader than she remembered, with streaks of grey in his beard and eyes that held both skepticism and curiosity. She didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, she laid out a modest folder containing dates, behaviours, names, Brittany, Robert, Jason. The shift in household dynamics, the cold erasure of a matriarch. "I'm not accusing anyone," she said. "I'm simply noticing patterns. And I need someone else to look." Marcus studied the notes in silence. "I don't break into phones. I don't plant bugs. I observe, I photograph, I verify." Evelyn smiled. "Didn't I used to teach you about ethics?" He chuckled, a low, surprised sound. "Ironic, considering how I left that school." "Unfinished doesn't mean unworthy," she said quietly. He leaned back. "This isn't revenge, is it?" Evelyn folded her hands, the folder resting neatly in front of her. "It's a reminder of who I am and who she is not." Outside, the rain had lightened and the clouds thinned into mist. Marcus pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. With a firm stroke of his pen, he wrote, "Observation begins Thursday 5, 10 p.m. She wore Chanel No. 5 to a PTA meeting." That was my first red flag. Marcus noted the detail with mild amusement as he adjusted his cap, seated 2 tables behind Brittany and Robert at a dimly lit Italian bistro near the outer ring of town. The fragrance floated past him in a soft trail when she arrived, unmistakable, expensive, and wholly unnecessary for a midweek dinner at a family restaurant. He didn't need to guess what the evening was. The restaurant offered a romantic dinner for 2 package prepaid, as confirmed on the copy of the receipt Marcus had already pulled via a quiet arrangement with the maître d'. Robert sat across from her, not quite smiling, not quite tense. There was a familiarity in how they shared the garlic bread, in the unspoken glances across wine glasses. Brittany leaned forward, slightly laughing at something. It wasn't flirtation. It was comfort. Marcus took 2 photos, one of the table, one of Brittany reaching into her clutch. The next day, Evelyn opened the envelope without comment. She reviewed each image, her face unreadable. No reaction to the hotel charge labelled 2 guests, dinner package. No question about the lipstick shade Brittany wore visible even in grayscale. Instead, Evelyn slid a calendar across the table. Tiny stars marked several days. Jason was out of town on all of these. She said, not looking up. "Corporate retreats, Noah told me." Marcus nodded. "That aligns with the dates I'm tracking. Same pattern, same restaurants." Evelyn circled 1 star and murmured, "She always said she didn't like seafood. But this one oyster room." She ordered the grilled scallops, Marcus replied, and brought them home. Later that week, he began checking Brittany's spending. The credit reports showed large purchases, beauty counters, perfume shops, a set of leather bags from a boutique in Connecticut. No corresponding withdrawals from joint accounts. If she had another source of funds, it wasn't legal. Marcus documented it all. Timestamps, bank statements, stills from security footage. When Evelyn came to the cafe for their next meeting, she was already writing in a small notebook when he sat down. She's using Jason's name to open store accounts, Marcus said, setting down a USB drive with all the footage and reports. She's borrowing credibility, Evelyn said absently. Until she doesn't need it. Marcus hesitated. You said she was manipulative, but she's not just that. She's building an exit plan. Evelyn finally looked at him, eyes sharp behind reading glasses. Her hands reached into her handbag and pulled out a small USB. It's time we record more than just receipts. A lie like tea eventually steeps through everything. Jason stirred honey into his cup as Evelyn poured hot water over a delicate sachet of Earl Grey. The china set between them bore soft blue flowers, faded from use, but polished to a quiet shine. Noah sat on the carpet by the bookshelf, humming to himself, flipping through a picture book Evelyn had kept from Jason's childhood. There was a moment of silence filled only by the soft clinking of ceramic and the faint ticking of the clock above the mantel. You know, Evelyn began, eyes focused on the steam rising from her cup. There was a time I thought I'd lost everything because of a lie. Jason looked up. You mean when you were principal? She nodded. Yes. A parent accused me of favoring a student unfairly, said I tampered with grades. It wasn't true, but the whispers grew louder than facts. I remember hearing something Jason said. Brittany mentioned it once. Said the school board nearly fired you. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Did she now? Jason shifted in his seat, as if he realized too late he'd revealed something unintended. It's strange, Evelyn continued. The only thing that cleared my name was a voicemail from the parent herself. She admitted she was angry and lashed out. I kept the recording. Jason blinked. You still have it, I do, not because I hold grudges, but because sometimes, she said slowly, people need to hear the truth in someone else's voice, not just their own assumptions. Jason looked down at his tea, unsure whether he was supposed to say something. I suppose he offered Brittany was just trying to be cautious. She didn't mean anything by it. Evelyn smiled, but there was no amusement in her eyes. Of course. I imagine caution is necessary when navigating stories, especially the ones we tell ourselves to feel safe. At that moment, Noah piped up from the floor. Mommy said bad videos shouldn't stay on phones. Jason turned to him. What do you mean, buddy? She said some videos are bad and make people sad, so she deleted the birthday one of you. Jason frowned. Which birthday? The one with the candle cake? The one where Grandma said nice things? There was a silence then, not like before, but heavier. Jason didn't speak. Evelyn didn't push. She merely reached for her tea, taking a slow sip, as if the room hadn't changed at all. She met Jason's gaze gently but directly. Some memories vanish. Some are erased. Some people hide money. Some hide lovers. Brittany hid passwords. The cursor blinked steadily on the screen, illuminating Marcus's face in the quiet of Jason's home office. The room was still cloaked in shadows, with only the soft hum of the computer and the occasional settling creak of the old house. He moved with the precision of someone who understood the weight of silence. Tonight was not about intrusion. It was about revelation. Brittany and Robert had left half an hour ago. Their destination, a business dinner at a restaurant Marcus had already flagged. Jason was still at the office. The Harper home, once Evelyn's sanctuary, was now neutral ground. But in this moment, it was Marcus's stage. He worked quickly. The folder he found was innocuously labeled Q3 Budget Archive. But nothing about its contents was ordinary. Within seconds, windows bloomed across the screen. Messages between Brittany and Robert strategizing their next move, discussing timelines, calculating assets. A PDF entitled Divorce Timeline. Draft. another labeled Asset Redistribution Plan. Several screenshots of wire transfers money leaving Jason's business accounts rerouted into a private bank under Brittany's control. There were photos too. Sunlight and ocean. Brittany and Robert poolside in Tulum, drinks in hand, wearing different names on the hotel registry. Smiles too rehearsed. Affection too easy. Marcus inserted a slim USB drive and began transferring the files. Every detail, every timestamp. No hacking, required only observation, logic, and patience. When it was done, he logged out, cleared the traces, and gently closed the drawer that had held nothing but a false sense of security. Hours later, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, the lamplight casting soft circles around her. She didn't look up when Marcus handed her the envelope. She only asked, "Enough?" He nodded. More than enough. She opened the envelope, scanned the contents briefly, then carefully removed a new sheet of paper. With graceful strokes, she wrote, "To Jason, from your mother. Only open if I press play." She placed the documents into an ivory envelope, sealed it, and walked across the room. From the antique chest that once held her wedding china, she removed a porcelain tea box. She lifted the lid and set the USB and the envelope side by side. Porcelain and plastic. Memory and proof. She returned to her seat and poured herself a cup of oolong tea. The scent curled upward, earthy and familiar. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She stared out the window and whispered, "Tomorrow I won't need to say a word." Then she reached for the phone. Her fingers dialed the number without hesitation. When Brittany answered, bright and unsuspecting, Evelyn's voice was warm even. "Brittany, dear, I'd love to come to the party. Let me know if I can bring dessert. They say you should never start a war at someone's birthday. But sometimes silence is the loudest explosion." The house was alight with celebration streamers, polished glassware, a jazz playlist looping softly beneath the chatter of guests. Jason's 33rd birthday party had drawn a crowd, colleagues from the firm, Brittany's circle of curated friends, and a few distant relatives who had RSVP'd late but showed up early. Evelyn arrived just after 3, carrying a cake in one hand and a modest leather purse in the other. No one asked what was inside the purse. No one thought to. She wore a navy dress, simple pearls, and a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. Grandma Noah ran up to hug her, his voice bright in the dull hum of polite conversation. She bent and kissed his forehead. "Your mum says there's a surprise gift later," he whispered. "She said it's going to be the best part." Evelyn raised her eyebrows, amused. "Is that so?" The living room was crowded, but the air felt cold. Brittany moved like a hostess on stage, offering drinks, complimenting outfits, adjusting her smile by the second. Jason stood beside her, distracted, nodding to comments he barely registered. He looked older, Evelyn thought, not by years, but by erosion. Evelyn made her way to the kitchen, placed the cake on the counter, and quietly checked the contents of her purse. The USB was there. She looked around, noted the television on the wall, same as last year. Beneath it, a small wireless device already synced was discreetly tucked behind a vase of lilies she had brought. No one noticed her slight adjustments. An hour passed. Laughter ebbed and flowed, but the undertow was tension. Robert entered late, slipping in through the side door, muttering something about traffic. Brittany's eyes flickered to him too quickly. Evelyn caught it. So did Jason. Soon Brittany raised a glass. To Jason, she began her tone warm and practiced. "To the man who brings structure to chaos, calm to storms, and love to our home. We're lucky to have you." Applause followed. Glasses clinked. She didn't say his mother's name, not once. When the noise faded, Evelyn stepped forward, calm and unrushed. She smiled at her son. I have something to share too. Just a short video. A memory, if you will. Brittany stiffened, the corners of her mouth held up by effort. Robert turned, slightly suddenly interested in a painting on the wall. Evelyn pulled the USB from her purse. The television lit up with a blue welcome screen awaiting a signal. She held the remote in one hand, but didn't press play. Instead, she turned to Jason. Would you like to see it with me? He looked at her, the noise around them melting away. His eyes were uncertain but searching. He nodded. She pressed play. The room fell silent. The screen came to life. The first image, Brittany in Jason's car, her hand on Robert's cheek, leaning in for a kiss. The room fell silent. Not because of shock, but because every person realized they had seen this coming and chose to ignore it. The video continued playing unbroken and matter of fact. 4 short clips, each stamped with a date, and time flickered across the television screen, like moments from a life that should have belonged to someone else. The first showed Brittany and Robert sitting in Jason's car parked behind a gym she never visited. She leaned into him, lips brushing his neck. The timestamp read, Tuesday, 7th, 13 p.m. The second clip panned through a hotel lobby, Brittany in a red dress, Robert behind her, their fingers brushing before he reached for her suitcase. The concierge greeted them with a welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway. The third was quieter. A restaurant booth candlelight, a shared dessert, Robert wiping frosting from Brittany's chin. She laughed. A laugh Jason hadn't heard in months. And the final, grainier but unmistakable, was of Brittany exiting the Harper house while Jason was on a business trip. Robert followed, holding a set of spare keys. Jason stood motionless. The guests looked anywhere but at the screen. Some shifted. One woman mumbled an excuse and headed for the door, followed by 2 others. The party had become something else entirely, no longer a celebration, but a reckoning. Jason blinked hard. Evelyn remained in her seat, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She hadn't looked at the screen once. She didn't need to. Brittany broke first. You planned this? Her voice cracked as she turned toward Evelyn, eyes wide with something between panic and fury. You hateful old, I didn't plan anything, Evelyn said calmly. I only played what already happened. Jason's mouth opened as if to say something, but closed again. His shoulders sagged. His hand reached toward the back of the chair, gripping the wood as though it might anchor him. I trusted you, he said, finally looking at Brittany but speaking as if to himself. With my child, my home, my mother. Then he dropped his phone onto the table, the thud startling in the hush. Noah, standing near the stairs, looked around, puzzled. Why is Mommy sad? He asked quietly. Brittany turned and made for the staircase, heels clicking across the hardwood. Noah, come here, she snapped. But before he could move, Evelyn stood. No, she said gently but firmly. He stays here. Her voice was not raised, yet it held the power of something irrefutable. Jason looked at his mother, eyes rimmed with pain, and something else, relief maybe, and said nothing. The video stopped. The screen returned to blue. But the silence had only just begun. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply stood up, left her cup untouched, and walked out. The last of the guests had gone. Some had offered Jason a nod of sympathy. Others simply slipped out, eyes averted. The once brightly lit living room now felt dim, despite every lamp still being on. Jason stood alone amid the ruins of celebration ribbons, drooping a slice of cake melting on a plate champagne flutes, half full and forgotten. The air smelled of frosting and something stale, Regret, maybe. He turned slowly toward the chair at the far end of the room, the one near the fireplace. His mother's chair. It was empty. No one had sat there after she left. Not even Noah, who usually climbed into her lap. It was as if the chair itself had absorbed the gravity of her absence and now held it like a warning. On the coffee table beside her untouched cup of tea was a small folded card. Jason picked it up. The front was blank. Inside her handwriting, steady and familiar, read, "I hope your next year starts with truth." No name, no accusation. Just that. He sat down slowly in her chair. It felt too upright, too firm, too deliberate. He shifted, tried to relax, but the cushion didn't give like it used to, or maybe it never had for him. He glanced at the corner cabinet and remembered the box of tea she always insisted on bringing when she visited. She never trusted their pantry, said the leaves needed to breathe, and no one in this house understood that. He got up, opened the cabinet. The box was still there, unopened, a quiet rebellion, or a quiet hope. Jason filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited. Noah came padding down the hallway in socked feet. He rubbed his eyes. Daddy Jason turned. "Hey, buddy, can't sleep?" "No. Is Grandma staying for cake?" Jason knelt and smoothed his son's hair. "Not tonight." Noah looked disappointed. "She always eats the corner piece. With the rose." "I know," Jason whispered. "I know she does." The kettle whistled. He poured water over the leaves, watched the steam curl upward. The aroma was different from their usual brew, richer, earthier, calmer. He brought the cup to the table, sat again in her chair, and took a sip. It was bitter. Not from the tea. From the silence. He glanced at the hallway where Brittany had disappeared. Her door hadn't opened since the video ended. She hadn't spoken a word. Neither had he. The house was quiet, in a way he didn't recognize. Not peaceful. Not tense. Empty. He stared across the table to where his mother had always sat. The light from the chandelier cast a shadow across the cloth napkin she had folded neatly before leaving. It hadn't moved. Jason swallowed hard. Tears welled not from anger or betrayal, but from the heavy realization that he had never once, not once, asked his mother if she was okay. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, the teacup trembling slightly in his hand. "I didn't know it would feel this empty. He wasn't invited. He never is. But Robert always knows when to run." The law office smelled of old paper and polished wood, a sterile kind of silence, only broken by the faint ticking of a wall clock. Jason sat across from the man who had until recently been no more than a name in the background of family photos, always slightly out of frame, always smiling just enough to pass. Robert adjusted his cufflinks. His suit was impeccable, pressed and dark. But he couldn't quite meet Jason's eyes. The attorney seated to the side opened a notepad and clicked his pen. No one had offered coffee. Jason didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He just looked at Robert as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Did you ever really love her?" Jason asked. Robert blinked. Brittany Jason didn't answer. Robert smirked, then shrugged. "She needed a way out. I just held the door." Jason slid a small folder across the table. Inside were printed images, screenshots, bank statements, Marcus's quiet trail of truth. Robert glanced at it, but didn't touch it. She was the one making the plans, Robert said at last. "I followed her lead. Always did." Jason nodded slowly. "So you were just an accessory?" "Call it what you like," Robert said, voice flat. "She played the game, I played along." The attorney scribbled something, the scratch of pen, louder than either man's tone. Jason took a breath. It wasn't fury he felt, just a strange, hollow clarity, the kind that comes after a storm when everything is soaked, but nothing moves. "You both planned to take my home, my company, and my child," Jason said. "But you forgot one thing." Robert tilted his head. "What's that?" Jason met his gaze for the first time. "My mother taught me how to rebuild." Robert let out a dry laugh, humorless and sharp. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Then I hope she taught you how to start alone." Jason didn't flinch. The clock ticked once more. He came with no flowers, no apology. Just the scent of old jasmine tea on his coat. The knock was gentle. Not hesitant, but soft, as if he already knew she wouldn't open right away. Evelyn didn't rise immediately. She let the silence speak first. After a few moments, she walked to the door and opened it. Jason stood there empty-handed, except for a worn frame clutched tightly in his left hand. His eyes searched hers, but she offered no expression, no question. She merely stepped aside. He entered slower than usual, as if the air was thicker here, denser with memories. The apartment looked just as he remembered. The books, still stacked with purpose, the same pale curtains letting in the 3 p.m. light, and the faint aroma of dried jasmine lingering from somewhere unseen. But now, it felt like entering a chapel. Evelyn gestured toward the table. He sat, carefully. He placed the frame in the center, facing her. Inside the photograph of his parents on their wedding day, his mother, younger, radiant, holding a single orange blossom. Neither of them mentioned it. Jason stood and walked to the cupboard. He found the kettle, the porcelain cups, the same tin of jasmine tea. The ritual had not changed, though the hands performing it had aged. He brewed it slowly, watching the leaves unfurl in the water. When he returned to the table, he poured for her first, then for himself. She sipped without a word. "I know," Jason began, "you've carried pain I never looked at." Evelyn didn't speak. Her silence was not cold, it was space. Space for him to arrive at his own truth. "I didn't just let her move you out," he said. "I watched it happen. I told myself it wasn't that bad, that it was transitional. But the truth is, I didn't want to choose." She met his gaze then, not with reproach, but clarity. "You chose," she said, "by not choosing me." Jason nodded, the movement brittle. "I thought forgetting would keep the peace." "You chose to remember." She placed her teacup down gently. "That's the difference." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. Sliding it across the table, he said, "The deed. I'm transferring my portion of the house. Back to you." She didn't touch it. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I don't need the house. I need to know you won't teach Noah to forget what matters." Jason looked down, shame and resolve braided together in his features. "I won't. Not again." The teacups steamed between them, the air softening. Evelyn leaned back, letting her eyes drift toward the window. The late sun traced a golden line across the floor. "Do you remember," she asked, "who planted the orange tree in the yard?" Jason blinked, then smiled faintly. "You did. On my 10th birthday. Said it would grow if I watered it myself." She nodded once. "It died the year your father passed." "I'll plant another," Jason said, more to himself than her. Then lifting his gaze. "But this time, Noah gets to pick the seed." Evelyn said nothing. She only reached for her teacup again, holding it steady between her fingers. Outside, a breeze stirred the branches of something not yet blooming. He never drank the tea. He said he didn't earn it. The morning was unusually clear. A gentle wind sifted through the budding trees, brushing the tops of benches and whispering across the surface of the pond. Evelyn arrived first, settling into her usual spot on the stone bench beneath the elm. A thermos sat beside her, its silver shell catching the light. 2 porcelain cups rested on a folded linen napkin waiting. Marcus arrived 5 minutes later. His gait was calm, though his shoulders held the tired pride of someone who had recently said too many goodbyes. He didn't smile as he sat, but he nodded the way former students do when words might betray too much. "I'm taking a job in Vermont," he said, eyes scanning the water instead of meeting hers. "Smaller city, less personal cases. People want background checks for babysitters and new boyfriends." She poured tea for both of them, jasmine again, and handed him a cup. He took it, but didn't drink. "I didn't know you were leaving so soon," she said. "I stayed longer than I should have," he replied. "But some truths are harder to walk away from." From her coat pocket, Evelyn withdrew a folded envelope. It was thick, sealed with red wax, and without a name on it. "This is for you," she said, placing it on the bench between them. "Don't read it here. Maybe not even soon." He looked at it, but didn't reach for it. "Is it about the case? No. It's about you." They sat in silence. A squirrel darted nearby, then changed its mind and scurried up a tree. Far off, a jogger passed their footsteps, rhythmic and distant. "I used to hate school," Marcus murmured, "until your literature class. You once said, 'People lie in speeches but rarely in letters.' That stayed with me." I said that. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Sounds clever. Must have been a good day." He chuckled softly. It was. For a while they talked not of Brittany, not of Jason, not even of betrayal. They talked about mistakes, about how truth ages differently than lies, about how knowledge, once planted, finds its way through any soil. As the sun moved a little higher, Marcus stood. "I should go," he said. Then, after a pause, reached into his coat. From the inner pocket, he pulled a black fountain pen, simple with her initials engraved near the clip. "You gave me this when I graduated," he said. "Told me it was for truth seekers." He placed it gently into her hand. "Most people think you won," he continued. "But I know. You weren't proving anything. You were just reminding them of what they forgot." Evelyn didn't reply right away. She rolled the pen between her fingers, felt its weight. Then she smiled softly, not triumphantly. "Truth isn't for winning," she said. "It's just to stand still. Just once. Steady." Marcus nodded. He left the teacup untouched on the bench. She watched him walk away, no handshake, no embrace, just the breeze accompanying his steps. When he disappeared behind the row of trees, she looked up at the pale sky. Clouds had begun to gather, like thoughts quiet but certain. People don't need to go far to let go, she thought. They just need enough silence. The tea beside her cooled slowly. She drank alone, but not lonely. She watched as her grandson buried the seed, small and trembling like hope rediscovered. The garden behind Evelyn's new apartment was modest, a rectangle of soil bordered by low brick shaded in the morning and kissed by afternoon light. Years ago, she would have trimmed the edges herself, planted marigolds and basil in neat rows. Now, she simply sat on the wooden bench, a blanket across her lap, and watched time unfold through smaller hands. Noah crouched in the center of the soft earth, holding a single orange seed between his fingertips. His fingers were clumsy, still unsure of the difference between pressing and burying. The soil loosened earlier, with a trowel gave way gently as he dug a small pocket with both palms. "Why do orange trees have thorns, Grandma?" he asked, not looking up. Evelyn leaned back, the sunlight threading through the canopy above and casting dappled gold on her hands. "So the fruit isn't stolen before it's ready," she said. "Everything sweet takes time. The thorns remind us not to rush." Noah nodded, the kind of nod that didn't signal full understanding, only the trust that he would one day understand. He dropped the seed into the hole and covered it carefully, patting it down with the seriousness of someone sealing a promise. Jason stood at the edge of the garden, one hand gripping the back of his neck. He had arrived quietly, his presence unsure, hovering like the shadow of a former life. He took a half step forward when Noah struggled to press the soil evenly. Evelyn raised her hand slightly, no words, just a simple motion of stillness. Jason froze. Let him do it. Noah poured water from a metal canister he'd insisted on carrying himself, dribbling a little on his sneakers. The soil drank greedily, darkening into rich brown. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small pebble he had found that morning, round, smooth, pale, and placed it beside the tiny mound. "A marker," he said proudly. Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's a good one. Even trees need to know they're seen." Jason moved closer, but still stood apart. From where he was, he could see both of them, the curve of Evelyn's back, as she leaned slightly forward, the earnest set of Noah's jaw. Something in him stung, not from pain, but from the recognition of distance he hadn't earned the right to close. The old orange tree behind the bench, once planted by Evelyn decades ago, stood silent. Its bark was cracked, its limbs sparse, but it still cast a noble shadow across the garden. Noah had chosen to plant the new tree just a few feet away. The wind shifted gently, carrying the scent of earth and something older, like old paper and citrus peel. A petal from the old tree fluttered down and landed between Noah's shoes. Jason cleared his throat. "Mum?" he began, then corrected himself. "Evelyn." She didn't look at him. "I can't ask for forgiveness," he said, voice low, almost ashamed. "But can you teach him about dignity, about holding on to it?" She watched Noah arranging small stones in a pattern only he understood. Then she replied, quiet and sharp, "I am teaching. You just need to stop interrupting him." Jason lowered his eyes. His fingers fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. The boy stood back from the seedling's grave, admiring his handiwork. The wind passed again, a little stronger this time. A leaf from the old tree twisted down and landed beside the pebble. Evelyn watched it all. Her hands, still her voice silent. But something in the air felt settled. The sun leaned westward now, casting long amber shadows through the garden. Noah had finished his careful ritual, his hands streaked with soil, his brow touched by sweat. Yet he did not run off or ask for a reward. He stood there next to the tiny mound of earth and the single pebble, as if standing guard for something sacred. Jason stepped closer, one cautious foot at a time, until he stood beside Evelyn's bench. His eyes lingered on the old orange tree, its gnarled branches, the patches of bark missing from years of weather and squirrels. He had forgotten how large it once seemed when he was Noah's age, how it used to bloom in late spring, and how its fruit always ripened at the same time each year. Consistent, unyielding. "I remember when you planted it," he said quietly. "I was maybe 7. You said it was for Dad." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She adjusted the blanket on her lap and kept her gaze fixed on Noah. "I did," she said at last. "He loved oranges, said they reminded him of small suns. Always said, 'Grow one, and you'll never forget where warmth comes from.'" Jason swallowed, throat dry. "It's still standing." "For now," she said. "But it's not about how long something stands. It's what it offers before it falls." He turned toward her, half expecting her to look away, half hoping she wouldn't. I should have been the one to plant that with him, Jason said. Evelyn shook her head gently. He would have said the same thing. About his own father. Jason let the silence settle between them. It wasn't heavy. It simply was. Like air that had always been there finally noticed. Noah walked over, clutching the empty water can, proud and quiet. He stood in front of Evelyn and looked up. "Will it grow?" he asked. Evelyn smiled, not wide, but true. "Yes, if you're patient and kind." Jason knelt down beside his son. "We'll take care of it together." Noah looked between them. "Can I name it Evelyn?" Nodded. "It's yours now." Noah looked thoughtful. "Then I'll call it Sunspot." Jason smiled, eyes glistening. Evelyn didn't speak. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded square of paper. It was faded soft at the edges. She held it toward Jason. He hesitated, then took it. Unfolded carefully, it revealed a child's drawing orange scribbles in the shape of a tree, a tiny house in the background, and a sun with a smiling face. "I found it in a drawer," she said. "You made it when you were Noah's age. Said it was our garden." Jason looked down at it for a long time. "I don't remember this." "You weren't supposed to," Evelyn replied. "But it remembered you." A hush fell over the garden. Wind stirred again, stronger now, and a dry leaf from the old orange tree loosened itself. It twirled once, then twice, before landing gently beside the fresh mound of soil Noah had marked. None of them spoke. Evelyn's eyes rested on that fallen leaf, on the spot where the old life and the new one touched. And in that quiet moment, where nothing moved but the air, it became clear. Growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it just needs silence light, and the willingness to try again. Her voice was calm, no bitterness, just a closing chapter spoken in tea-breath tones. The light slanted through the window like a whisper, soft, angled, golden. The Friday afternoon sat gently on the shoulders of Evelyn's small apartment. The wind nudged the lace curtain forward, then back a quiet breath, threading through the room. On the coffee table, next to the familiar porcelain teapot, sat the old digital recorder. Its plastic edges were dulled with age, its screen faintly scratched. Evelyn had wiped it down earlier, not out of necessity, but reverence. The device was never meant to be used again, until today. She poured herself a cup of jasmine tea, the aroma warm and distant like memory itself. Then she sat down, picked up the recorder, and pressed the red circle. A soft beep, a flicker on the screen. REC. "If someone finds this recording," she began, her voice barely above the hum of the wind outside. "I suppose I am no longer around to explain why I made it, but explanation is a burden. This is something else." She paused. The teacup clicked gently as she lifted it, sipped, placed it back. "I have spent many years trying to hold on to the things that prove I existed. A marriage license, a deed, a teaching certificate, even a set of bone china no one wanted to keep but me. But none of them truly carried my name, not the way I mean it." Her tone was not mournful, nor tired. It was whole. "People think legacy is what you leave behind. I disagree. Legacy is what you remember about yourself when the world forgets." Outside, a bird landed on the railing. It chirped once, then hushed. "There was a time," she continued, "when I believed silence was survival. That if I didn't speak, I'd be spared the pain of being unheard. But silence, it doesn't protect you. It just delays the moment you realize you are always alone in the conversation." Another pause. Not heavy, just natural. "I saw Brittany one last time. She didn't know it was the last. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't ask why. I only said, 'Take care.' And that was enough." The cup lifted again. A soft sip. I hope Jason remembers that dignity doesn't shout, that Noah learns thorns are not flaws, but boundaries, and that none of them need my permission to be good men, only their own reflection when no one's watching. A breeze carried the curtain forward again, brushing the edge of Evelyn's sleeve. She glanced down at the recorder. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was Evelyn. And with that, she placed the cup down, clink gently finally. She pressed stop. The screen blinked, then held steady, saved final Eve, record. She leaned back, not smiling, not weeping, just resting. In the quiet with the light turning amber and the world gently letting her go, not because she disappeared, but because she had already arrived fully in herself. Noah asked if she'd be coming to dinner. Jason answered, "She'll always be steeping in the tea." The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, tracing soft gold along the edge of the ceramic counter. The house had grown quieter these days, not in mourning, but in reverence. The stillness was not hollow. It was filled with her. Jason stood barefoot on the cool tiles, lifting the tin of jasmine tea from the top cupboard. He tapped the lid, open the aroma rising like a whisper from memory. He didn't need to check the instructions. He knew the right temperature, the perfect steeping time, not because he had read it somewhere, but because he had watched her do it countless times, always without hurry. On the table, he placed 3 cups, one in front of his seat, one for Noah, who was now humming softly at the breakfast nook, his little fingers busy with coloured pencils, and one at the far corner. The 3rd cup remained empty. Noah glanced up. "Daddy, who's that cup for Jason?" smiled, not the wistful kind, but something anchored warm. For someone who taught Daddy how to keep his heart steady. Noah nodded solemnly, as if it made perfect sense. Children don't always ask for stories when they feel them already unfolding around them. Outside the kitchen window in the square of garden soil, Jason had learned to tend a slender sapling stretched upward, shaking dew from 2 new leaves. The orange tree, or rather the one that had been planted from Noah's trembling hand under Evelyn's silent watch. Jason watched the branches move. His mother hadn't returned in voice nor ghost. She had returned in form, tea tree time. Behind him, Noah had shifted his drawing closer. "Look, Daddy," he said, holding it up. A rough sketch crayon and pencil of a tree with round orange bulbs and 3 teacups under its branches. Jason knelt beside him. "You remembered the cups." "Grandma liked tea," Noah replied simply, and she said trees remember who plants them. Jason didn't answer. He didn't have to. The warmth in the kitchen answered for him. He took the pruning shears from the drawer, guided Noah outside, and pointed to the wilted edge of a lower leaf. "You try." Noah took the shears. His grip was cautious, but sure. One snip, clean and soft. Jason nodded. Perfect. Sometimes letting go keeps the whole thing healthy. They returned inside, and Jason returned to the kitchen. The tea was ready. He poured it into 2 cups, paused, and poured a 3rd. It sat in its place, untouched. He did not drink right away. Instead, he moved to the hallway, opened the drawer where the photo albums were kept, and drew out a wooden frame. Evelyn's portrait, one taken at the garden, her eyes calm, her scarf, catching light. He hung it above the dining table, slightly above eye level, then stepped back. Jason adjusted the frame until it was straight. He didn't speak aloud, didn't whisper a message to the photograph. He simply stood there, letting the silence surround him, not as emptiness, but as continuity. The kind Evelyn had always believed in. A presence that didn't need a voice to be felt. In the kitchen, Noah was setting the table without being asked. He placed the spoons carefully beside each teacup, even the one meant for no one, or rather for everyone. As Jason returned to the table, he glanced at the cup Evelyn used to favor ivory porcelain with a faint blue rim. It had been cracked once many years ago, and Jason had offered to replace it. Evelyn had refused. Some things hold better after being broken, she'd said, because they know where they were fragile. Now the cup sat whole again, clean, warm with tea, waiting not for lips, but for memory. Noah climbed into his chair and folded his hands. "Do you think she can smell the tea from the sky?" Jason chuckled, brushing a hand over his son's hair. "If anyone can, it's her." They ate dinner in small bites with pauses. Between each pause was a silence that didn't demand to be filled, only noticed. And within that space, Evelyn lingered. When the dishes were done, and the last light of evening leaned across the wooden floor, Jason stepped out to the garden. The orange tree caught the dusk, like a promise. 2 more leaves had unfurled since last week. He placed a small stone at its base, flat and smooth etched with a single word, Evelyn, not for memorial, but as acknowledgement. Inside, Noah had fallen asleep on the couch, a half-finished drawing in his lap. Jason picked it up gently. This one showed 3 hands holding a teacup together. One hand small, one large, and one that seemed to glow, slightly drawn, not with lines, but with the outline of something remembered. Jason placed the drawing beside the photograph. Then, with slow hands, he poured one last cup of tea into Evelyn's cup. He did not drink it. He just let it sit there, steeping. The tea in her cup had long gone cold, but every week it was poured warm again. The house no longer echoed with accusations or silence. It now breathed through routine acts of quiet respect. Evelyn was gone, but not erased. Her integrity had stitched itself into teacups, orange trees, and the hands of a child learning to prune without trembling. Justice may arrive late, but when it does, it pours like warm tea, steady, undeniable, and enough to thaw even the coldest doubt. Some stories are not meant to shout, they only need to be remembered. If this story stirred something in you about truth aging or silent strength, share your thoughts in the comments, like if Evelyn made you feel seen. And follow Heavy Stories to never miss the quiet revolutions still waiting to be told.